Okay, so welcome to today's podcast. Now, I have said this in previous podcast episodes, but I'll give you a little bit of background, just because it gives clarity to the podcast episode of today. I've been in this game, I'm a Union Iron worker, and have been for almost 24 years now, complete 24 years. Come July of 2026, I will start my 25th year being in this game, in this trade. And during that time, I have held numerous positions. As an apprentice, became a foreman, journeyman, became a foreman, became a superintendent. I've been a construction manager for companies, and my current role is safety manager. Now, as a safety manager, I have been in the actual role for a fair amount of time, right? I've had multiple, when you work for a smaller firm, you end up wearing multiple hats. Nothing wrong with that. But what happens is that, a company, obviously, they appreciate versatility in their employees. I certainly value that as well. But what happens is not only, have I occupied that position for some time, but I've been involved in safety for a lot longer than I have been, let's say, a safety manager or safety director, if that's what maybe your position says safety director. It's the same thing. And during that time, I have seen some very interesting trends. I find some things very fascinating. Number one, I can remember when I first got in back in 2002, and the presence of safety, the, let's say, respect of safety, the, tipping my hat towards the safety manager and what they're actively trying to do, a good one. That's the caveat, a good one. It has increased significantly. And for that, I am grateful. It used to be that people were very dismissive of a lot of safety measures. There were people who thought that it was just something to slow someone down. It's a waste of money. I've heard, if someone can utter it, I have heard it. And I have usually countered, much like many of you out there who may very well have said some of the similar things, right? Number one, because safety is very reactionary in many instances, oftentimes we can say this with full vigor, that every safety rule is written in blood. Somebody, or likely many people, have lost their life for this specific rule or regulation to have been enacted. It's 100% true. It's 100% true. Another thing that I have also seen and kind of paid a little bit more attention to as things have kind of progressed is that, and I've encountered this my entire career, safety cops. Now, just for those of you who are unaware, you might be listening to this podcast and you're curious about the distinction. All right, a good safety professional. There's different levels, but a good safety professional is an individual who is actively trying to grow a robust safety culture at the company that they're working for. I have met numerous solid safety professionals. I like to believe that I'm one myself, but I definitely have had interactions with individuals who are indeed very much of that, they're cut from that cloth. Quite frankly, they're also, it's also a telltale sign. If you got a company that has a revolving door with safety professionals, it's usually because management is resistant to building that robust safety culture. But just like I have encountered, and so have you, the listener, encountered good safety managers, you've likely also encountered bad safety managers. And those bad safety managers, I call safety cops. You probably have more colorful terms for them, but I call them safety cops. I call those individuals safety cops because they're always looking to punish or penalize someone. They're not actively looking to protect the individual. Oftentimes, they're looking to justify their job, or at least that's the appearance. That is what the overwhelming majority of individuals who are on a job site tend to think. They tend to believe that that individual and the way that they are, let's say, enforcing safety regulations or company rules, and the way that they operate, the way that they speak, instead of stopping an unsafe action, going up and firing off an email or a text message or a phone call to somebody else within the company, instead of actually addressing the specific issue right there in the field. And there are so many other things that can be done and things that we can sit here and talk about. These are the characteristics, these are the hallmarks, if you will, of a safety cop. And I, like millions of other Americans, have had our run-ins with safety cops. They get very little respect. They get very little personal respect, and they get very little office or positional respect because it's kind of slimy. And that's the major issue when it comes to, like, how are you operating? How are you convincing individuals that they should be wearing their PPE? They should be doing what they're supposed to be doing. And they should be looking out for them, not just themselves, but everybody else. You should want to go home the same way you came to work. This makes perfect sense for a lot of people when they begin to think about things. And yet, what typically happens is that safety cops are often allowed to continue to exist, primarily because the company that they're employed by not only tolerates it, but thoroughly enjoys it. I'll get to that in a second. I actually have a main, let's say, talking point or topic that I really want to plant my flag in this podcast episode, and we'll get to it because of the kind of trends I see. But what I mean when I say they enjoy it, we'll kind of explore that a little bit more. Safety cops are also able to maintain employment within a specific company. Typically, one of the other reasons why is because they know that they're going to have a more difficult time at an actual company that values safety and not the way that they're doing it. Meaning, if I'm playing safety cop and I'm very militaristic, I'm very shady, sneaky. I'm very my intent is not necessarily to keep guys, let's say, safe. It's to keep the company's, let's say, EMR rating down low. When these two things are not mutually exclusive, we can sit here and do both at the same time. We can actually care about employees while also trying to keep the company EMR down, make sure OSHA doesn't give us any citations, because we're actively participating in creating a robust safety culture, keep our TRIR, or total recordable incident rate, for those of you who are not in the safety world. We can do these things while also building a robust safety culture. But oftentimes safety cops have, what I'll tell you is, quite frankly, as far as I'm concerned, character flaws that are then brought into their job description and what they actually execute out in the field via enforcement. And because that is the case, they often have this underlying assumption, and I think it's probably true, to be blunt, that the way that they operate at company X, the way that they operate over here at this particular company, is not going to be tolerated at this company. And within, the operating mode that they kind of function in, and the way that they function, it's rewarded that way. And because that's the case, they feel like they have some power. And this right here just completely, it just derails any kind of rapport a safety manager, and in this case, like I said, it's a safety cop, it just completely demoralizes and derails any kind of conversational tone and safety culture that you're at that could potentially exist within the company. And as a safety manager, my intent, to be sure, is, like I said earlier, I want to keep down EMR rating. I want to pay less in workers' comp. I want to have, a lower total recordable incident rate, TRIR. I want to do all these things. I want to make sure that we're at the vanguard or at the forefront of keeping our human resources, the guys and girls. I want to make sure that our human resources are kept safe. I 100% do. And quite frankly, a good safety manager is often, finds themselves as the bridge in between the guys in the field and upper management. Nothing wrong with that there, provided that they're not a safety cop. Safety cops bring down the entire mood within the safety profession. You know them and I know them. You've interacted with them and I've interacted with them. And they need to be called out for what they are for obvious reasons. Now, earlier I said we're going to get to what I'll say is the crux or the heart, the issue that I want to plant my flag in. So as a safety manager, and this is something that, listen, if you have a safety manager, all right, if you have a safety manager or you happen to be a safety professional, and I mean a good one, not a safety cop. And you know what? I'll even go so far as if you are a safety cop and someone shared this podcast episode with you, then I would encourage you to also listen, because this is my plea, if you will, not just from me sitting here talking in a podcast format, but this is the actual plea. If you have been listening to me for any amount of time or reading anything that I've really, kind of substantially written, I am very, very critical of HR, significantly so. HR, or human resources, the departments that exist within companies, and I do broad brush here, and unabashedly so. I typically say something to the effect of HR companies, the entities, are nothing more than company preservation mechanisms. In other words, it is a department whose their prime job, if you will, is to keep the company out of trouble. Now, if I can help if I can help the people in the field, if I can help those individuals in the company, great. But my prime target and prime task as somebody who is employed by HR, my prime task is to keep the company out of trouble, or it is to preserve. It's a company preservation tool. That's the mechanism, HR. Now, they may not have started out this way. Without doing a significant deep dive and having, let's say, conversations with, human resource professionals from 50, 60, 70 years ago, and getting, like, let's say, the lay of the land. This is just observational. When I do significant amounts of research and you start talking about the way that they operate and the directives that kind of get rolled out, I have been extraordinarily critical of HR departments, and quite frankly, for good reason. I believe wholeheartedly, 100%, that companies that have HR departments, that when they begin, and they've been doing this for a long time now, decades for this matter, their intent is to, because they're trying to preserve the company, that what they end up doing then is they roll out SOPs, standard operating procedures. We're trying to dehumanize the policies and procedures as much as possible and then you give this dehumanization directives, you give them to your members of management. Oftentimes it's your middle management, because your directive is to be a company preservation tool. You're a mechanism. I'm thoroughly convinced that the rollout of SOPs, standard operating procedures, and directives via to middle management, you're attempting to dehumanize everything. I want to take away the human element as much as possible because that's where error is included. And what I want to do then is to just give middle management often, here's a set of steps. And if this person or this person or this person is not, adhering to this step or this step or this step, we can actively, let's say take steps and procedures to cut that person out, to shift liability to them and not to us. I've seen this over and over again. I am firmly in the camp that HR departments are nothing more than company preservation tools. All right. Now, why am I bringing this up when it comes to safety? Because, personal opinion here, I believe that there are some in the safety realm that are actively trying to take safety in the same direction. Let me make sure that I'm clear. I believe that there are usually safety cops, all right? But there are some, and this is my plea to not do this, but my plea is that we do not turn safety departments, however well-intentioned or not, is that we do not turn it into HR Department 2.0. That is my concern. My concern, and it's a slow creeping thing that has happened over the past, I've been optimistic about the intentional safety that I have seen roll out in my time as a union iron worker. But my concern is that more and more safety cops get into positions of authority and begin to take the safety department and turn it into an HR 2.0 and use it as a company preservation tool rather than what it really should be, which is I want to, not only do I want to, keep the company out of trouble, but I want to make sure that I'm actively involved in promoting a robust safety culture and I have good, open, faith-based dialogue with the employees that are underneath my umbrella of safety. And oftentimes what I have seen is that this right here, this camaraderie with the employees, this back and forth, this dialogue, this respect, all of this, the ability to build that culture and to serve, quite frankly. Yeah, I use the serve word because I'm serving the guys out in the field. This gets squashed and it gets demoted while I see the elevation of the preservation of the company. And again, the two of these things can happen at the same time. And in fact, I would say that you are far more likely to build a robust safety culture when the employees know that you are not a power hungry, job demonstrating safety cop and you're actively attempting to influence them, to inspire them. I want you to be safe, not just because I want the company to not have any TRIRs or, I want the company to have a lower EMR rating. I want to be safe because as another human being, I actually care that when you go home, it is you're going home in the same exact manner that you came to work in. Because I want to be able to sleep at night and to sleep with the conscience knowing that I have done my absolute best as a safety professional to help and do my part to build a robust safety culture for you to do what you're supposed to do so that we all can do what we're supposed to do. It's not solely about a company preservation mechanism. And what I see sometimes are companies that begin to make that what I'll say is that transition, that slide, that slow creeping death the death of safety culture, the death of genuine, authentic safety management, and they actively begin to go towards the HR 2.0 route, the company preservation mechanism. And that to me is a sad, sad state of affairs. And sometimes it's not even the safety cop. Oftentimes it is, but it's not always that way. Sometimes this is actually driven by upper management or even in HR departments. HR departments go, well, if what I am supposed to do, if my task at hand is to be a company preservation mechanism, I look at safety and I'm rubbing my hands together and I'm going, that right there is one more tool in my toolbox to try and keep my company, the company preservation mechanism, well-oiled machine. I can add safety into this toolbox. How do I do this? And sometimes they just run it right on up the ladder and talk to upper management and get upper management's blessing to begin to bring in safety underneath that fold. And you stifle the active contributing voice that safety should have and a seat at the table when it comes to building that robust culture. Again, I'm not interested in somebody saying safety first, safety first. I don't want to hear that. I want you to show me through your active, contribution and dialogue and job site conversational tones, et cetera, et cetera. To me, there's a reason. There's a secondary reason, by the way, that I think HR departments have become, let's say, company preservation tools and are actively dragging, in some instances, safety departments into that discussion. And I think it has been for the past 100, 120 years, the over prioritization of management at the expense of leadership. And I have said this multiple times. I say it, in the whole leadership series on my website. And I say it in conversational tone all the time. You manage a process, but you lead people. And can you manage people within a process? Yes, that's precisely what HR departments are actively and have been actively creating for the past 50 years. The more robust this, let's say, management policy is, the easier it is, in theory, to manage people within this process. And so I've got, it's black and white, right? I've got this rule and this rule and this rule, and this is how I'm supposed to be when it's, I'm managing my employees within this company or whatever, and everything seems to run good until you hit a snag, and that snag is one of your key employees does something against the management process. And now you're seen from an HR department's perspective as a hypocrite because you're not going to hold that key employee accountable. Because what you're doing effectively is I'm holding, these other employees accountable for X, Y, and Z underneath the management process. But now I'm going to begin to wade into a little bit of leadership because I need to find out what's going on with this. And so this over prioritization of management and the under prioritization of leadership has affected HR departments to a significant degree. And what I am seeing, and maybe what you are seeing, and I'd be curious to hear your experiences and your stories, if indeed your experiences corroborate what I'm saying, or maybe you're seeing the exact opposite. Companies are going in the opposite direction, but I am seeing a lot of safety departments and safety. They're looking at that as a company preservation tool to manage people underneath what I'll say is a black and white, rigorous, step-by-step management process, as opposed to leading individuals. Because let's face it, people are messy. We're messy. right? And this idea that we can compartmentalize work and home life is a bunch of bull crap. And this idea that because I can compartmentalize that and what goes on at work doesn't affect home and vice versa, that I don't need to actively be looking to exercise a leadership muscle and to dive down into it. It takes an enormous amount of your time. It will. Real effective leadership will cost you something. And if you're going to be a good safety manager, somebody who is always available to talk to the guys out in the field and figure out what's going on and to actively and consistently be in their corner advocating for them, against, let's say, a customer's unsafe request or upper management, and they're out of touch reality with unsafe conditions and issues and whatever direction and implements they want to go, and then fight off also this HR tendency to drag safety departments into the fold of a company preservation mechanism at the expense of leading guys in the field and not just influencing them to do what they're supposed to do and do what we know we should be doing via their paycheck, but actively seeking to inspire them because of your genuine, authentic, willing to, stand in the trenches with them. That's what I'm seeing. And that's ultimately what's really important is I don't want to just influence the guys or, anybody else. And millions of company safety professionals and HR departments, they influence people all the time because they hold their paychecks over them. I would far more prefer that I'm going beyond influence and I want to inspire them. Why? Because I, or you in this case, hopefully, want to be safety conscious, and I'm a safety manager that puts his money where his mouth is. I'm in your corner. I understand what we've got going on. Let's get to it. I want to be a tool in your toolbox and not necessarily one in HR's toolbox. So my plea then, as I, wind down this podcast episode, is quite simply this. If you are a safety professional or actively thinking about becoming a safety professional, my concern and my plea to you is that you fight tooth and nail for the company that you're working for to not have a safety department that falls underneath the HR echelon and the HR 2.0 mode, which is to turn a safety department into a company preservation tool at the expense of dealing with the guys on an individual humanistic level. Because we can do both, quite frankly. I can dialogue with those individuals that I work around and serve and make sure that things are taken care of and that I'm not a safety cop and that I'm actively looking to promote the company and I can do these at the same time. I don't have to weigh them in the balance and disregard the guys out in the field at the expense, right? So I can promote the company. I don't have to do this. That's the easy way out, if you ask me. And that is, in a nutshell, what I see from time to time and what I'm concerned with. Because from a company perspective, it's a whole lot easier to they've already seen the blueprint with HR departments. And so the thought process then becomes, well, it's very easy to manage. It's become easy to manage people from policies. So why don't we just do that with safety as well? And that's a slow creeping death to a safety culture, if you ask me. And that creates a rift rather than healing any divide between the people that get the job done out in the field and those of us who are, let's say, members of management. So if you're actively in the field as a safety manager or even in upper management, I my plea then, of course, is this: that you fight tooth and nail to keep a safety department and a safety culture not heavily influenced and becoming part of the HR company preservation mechanism, but that we are making ourselves a key necessity and continuing to keep open the dialogue between the ones that are in the field getting the job done and the company itself. And we're not actively looking to turn it into just a simple process. That is my plea to you. If you are a safety manager, if you are a safety cop, I would strongly consider looking and having conversations with actual safety professionals who really do care, and see how they do things and how it's different from what you do. You may not be able to change the tide at the current company you're working for. And you can almost always, if you got a revolving door that's in the safety department, that's typically what's taking place, is that they're looking for somebody that's quote unquote well qualified that will be a safety cop, as opposed to somebody who is going to be a forward-thinking, open-minded safety manager who is actively invested in the safety culture of the guys out on the job site. That's usually a red flag. So, fight for the safety department to be a standalone, at least out from the HR umbrella. Would that 20 years from now, we would still have active, engaged safety professionals who are genuine and authentic and are not HR tools in a toolbox. Fight. All right. Well, thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast or watch it, depending on how you consume your content. If you want, you can go down into the description. You can click on that link for wanting to be a guest or have a conversation with me. It'll send me an email and we can get the conversation started. And if you've got some war stories or things that you would like to have a conversation with, I'm all ears. As always, thank you and stay safe out on the job.